Devora Rogers, what one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
I wish I would have known that everything changes and that the person you are when you get married might not be the person you are 10 or 20 years later. That the person you are or the child that you have in your hands, at 1 is not going to be the same kiddo at 5 or at 10. And that everything that you think you know about who you are and the way the world works is subject to change.
And finally getting your head around that. And I don't know that we ever come to terms with it, but we maybe understand it or accept it. I don't know whether we ever become really comfortable with it. But when you finally understand that change happens all the time, it can sort of free you up from certain constraints within life, can't it?
Yeah, it can send you on a pretty rude awakening at points. It can make for a pretty crazy midlife crisis, as I experienced.
Going through one right now. Right now.
I try to normalize that. Now I'm going to be 46 later this month, and I've been through the ins and outs in marriage and life, and now I just tell people, like, you might not like your husband in 10 years and you might go through some stuff, and just be prepared that the starry-eyed thing that you're going through now probably won't last.
Yeah. I mean, listen, with one fairly ugly divorce under my belt, and I'm sorry, I make that sound like I'm after another. I'm really not. I'm married again. Started running marathons last year, thinking about doing an Ironman this year. Like midlife crisis. I've got the tattoo to prove it and everything. So but life does change, and things evolve, don't they, and change over time. And I think the key thing about human behavior, I always remember learning in my early 20s, is you've got to stop seeing all change as negative. It's almost like we're hardwired as people to see change. Oh, things are going to be terrible. It's changed. But actually, you look at the phone in your pocket, or the fact that we're recording a podcast over, between LA on a video, and I think change is really positive most of the time, isn't it?
Well, a couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with MS out of nowhere, multiple sclerosis. And I was like, no, see, I don't get chronic diseases. You have the wrong person. So that's not me.
I haven't got time for this illness. So can you? Yeah.
Right. And it was very funny. I had a number of men I had worked with, in particular, guys who worked in sales, who just, you have to say something about guys who work in sales, is that they know how to keep in touch. And I had several, I would say half a dozen of them reached out to me by text. I didn't even know they had my phone number. And they all said the same thing. They said, I just want you to know you're going to be fine because I know you. And so you're going to be fine. And one of them had MS, and he told me, he said, it's actually going to be great. And I was like, get out of here. Go to hell. Like, how could you tell me that? And in the end, he was right. I'm fine. The medications are fine. I'm good. Yeah. It taught me that, about resilience and adversity, and it taught me that I'm human like everyone else, apparently.
Yeah. There must have been a moment. This is a marketing podcast, not a self-help podcast. But look, we're all people. Marketers are people, and we do the work for people. So let's just talk about it for a moment, if you don't mind. There must have been a moment where you sat in the medical room, and the doctor gives you that information, and you just sat there looking, going, "What?" It must be a hell of a gear change at that point. In that moment, the world must spin around you.
Well, it was worse because the emergency room doctor said, I hate to tell you, but you have brain cancer. You have 2 very large growths in your brain, and we're going to have to operate tomorrow on your brain to get out to see if it's brain cancer. So it was even worse than that, because they basically gave me a death sentence. And then they came back like many, many, many hours later, and they were like, oh, about that, sorry, wrong diagnosis.
Get the fuck out.
I had already called my colleagues and been like, I have brain cancer, I'm dying. And I called my dad and told him, and everyone was like, what is going on?
Oh my God. Like, did people lose their job over this?
Oh, no.
Look, I'm not one for hiring and firing people, right? But You can't just tell someone they're dying of multiple brain cancers and then go, Devora. Do you know what? There's actually another Devora Rogers in the next room, and we got you confused. You know, geez, it happens all the time. Anyway, sure, there's a Coke, and you sit there, and we'll be back with the right diagnosis in a minute. Surely not.
It was terrible, but I will say the good news was that when they came back and they said, "Oh, you just have MS," then then you're like, well, deadly brain cancer, MS. Like, I guess I'll take the MS. So
I mean, at that point, you probably felt like you won the lottery, didn't you? It was chaos. So I'm reminded at times like this of the words of Admiral Stockdale. I don't know if you've come across him. He's mentioned in one of Jim Collins's books, I think Good to Great, about the Stockdale paradox.
yeah, sure.
He was captured in the Vietnam War. He was the most senior US military personnel captured.
Mhm.
And he kind of became quite stoic in his approach to survival, really, and wrote a lot post Vietnam about it. And he described his time in prisoner of war camp as the best time of his life. That made him as a man. And when you read about the conditions in those camps, to see that he got through the other side of that and viewed it as a thing that defined him, but in a positive way, you're like, that's a real way to focus on adversity, isn't it? To sort of take it and take the lesson out of it. And I'm not sure I'm big enough for that, but it sounds like you are. So that's a hell of a start. I don't know where we go from there. I think we might just wrap the podcast here, Devora.
What did that teach me about marketing?
Yeah. What did it take? Get a LinkedIn post.
Okay,
What did that
wait,
teach you about B2B sales?
I do have a really funny story that does bridge it. We'll see if it works or not. Okay, so when I was in the hospital, and by the way, being American hospitals, they're rough. Okay, like even for a white woman whose first, language is English, it was not fun. But in the hospitals, and I don't know if they have this in the UK or Europe, but they have these. They will bring, the one thing they will bring you is a hot blanket. You can ask for it any time of day or night, and they will bring you a hot blanket. And so I was like, where do they get the hot blankets, right? So this is where my research mind and my marketer mind are going, right? And so I started asking, where do you get the hot blankets? There's a microwave for blankets in the hospital. And all I could think about, and of course I was, on multiple drugs, and they're like, who is this lady asking us about the blanket microwaves? And I would say to the nurses, do you realize somebody had to come up with, they had to realize this was a problem to solve. Then they had to pitch it. Then their company had to make it. Then a guy had to come and sell it. Then you all had to buy it. And now it's working well enough that in any hospital in the United States, you can get a blanket that's been microwaved and will be the best thing that has happened to you all day long. And I think they thought I was insane. But that is how my mind works as a researcher, as a marketer, is who thought of this? What problem did it solve? Who knew? I mean, Andy, think about it. How did they discover that all the patients were cold and that the thing that they could solve, that they could solve for that would be inexpensive would be a blanket microwave?
So before we go down a rabbit hole about the hospital provision in different countries, the only thing I will say to that is British hospitals are crumbling and falling to pieces at the minute. But the one thing that you would never need in a British hospital is a heated blanket. They are hotter than the surface of the sun. Any time of day or night, you walk into a British hospital and you want to take swimwear with you. Not like if you're a patient and you're just there, they always feel a little cold. But you go and visit anyone and you're like, I'm just going to go and change into my Speedos before we walk through the front door. It's like a sweatbox. They are horrifically hot. So no, I don't believe anyone in the history of the NHS has ever said, I need a heated blanket. I just don't believe it's happened. It might have done, but I really don't think it is. So US healthcare, probably better than UK healthcare, but we have warmer hospitals and we'll stick with that. Right. Anyway, let's get to talking about marketing a minute. Just have a listen to me in my introduction and we'll be back in about 2 minutes with Devora. Bear with us. Hey up and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I am the host of the show. And, well, I don't know that we've ever had an introduction quite like that. That was a hell of an opening from Devora. I've rarely lost for words, but I certainly was during that time. So what a story. I still can't quite get my head around it. But hey, look, we're not going to dwell on that. Let's keep moving. I just want to tell you about the Seth Godin workshop as well. We did one last week in Dublin and it was just incredible. Seth was fantastic. He was on fire. such clarity to his thinking that really, really helps people come up and solve their problems. So if you want to come to the next one, it is on Monday, the 2nd of June in Derry. All the details are in the show notes. Have a look, click the link. There's a discount for Strategy Sessions listeners as well. So please do come along. You will get so much value from these workshops. I promise you. It's absolutely incredible. Enough of that. Let's get back to Devora. Here we go. Devora, thank you for that amazing start to the podcast. Let's bring it back to marketing, if you don't mind. And do you just want to give a little bit of background to who you are? You've kind of teased you're a market researcher and a marketer. Tell everyone a little bit about where you work, where you're based, all that sort of stuff, and then we'll get into your greatest hits.
Sure. So I'm a market researcher and chief strategy officer at Alter Agents. We are a custom, independently owned research firm based out of Los Angeles originally, but now fully remote. And we work with clients all over the world, including YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, all the tech companies, retailers like Walmart, and brands like PepsiCo and Nespresso. And we do all kinds of different research, quantitative, qualitative, and even neuroscience, which I'd love to talk about today if you're interested.
Absolutely. I mean, all of the above. Yes, let's do it. Now, you mentioned a number of great brands most people have probably heard of, but your greatest hits are probably maybe best known. Would that be the best way to describe it as your work for your work with Google and ZMOT, or Zero Moments of Truth? As a Brit, saying Z as Z kind of feels a bit strange. So, but you were involved in that research.
Yeah, I actually co-created it. I was not a researcher at the time. So to your original question of like, what do you wish you had known 10 years ago? Sometimes you come up with things that change the course of your life. And the Zero Moment of Truth was an example of that. I was just somebody who had worked in tech and journalism and television, so like kind of a mix of entertainment and technology. And at the time, I was working at a media lab, and we realized that we needed a product to sell, and we came up with this idea that we could sell research, and the research that we ended up selling to Google ended up being how they made their case for the fact that people would eventually buy things online, which it's crazy that that was not very long ago that Google had to convince people that people would buy things online. But they
I
did. They
mean,
had
look,
to like work very hard at it.
we're both of a vintage where we remember that happening, and people go, "Oh yeah, I know. They might buy books online, but nobody would ever buy clothes online. I mean, you just
We would do
can't
that.
try them on. No one's ever going to do that. Why would you do that?" This is in the recent past, isn't it? That people thought like that, and it wasn't.
Yes.
It wasn't a thought. It was a fact almost, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a
Yeah.
fact that nobody and at the time actually Google wasn't even saying people would buy things online. They were just saying people are looking at things online and researching. We called it pre-research. They eventually,
Hmm.
because their Google named it ZMOT. But what we realized is that people were doing a lot of research, and that research was ultimately informing their purchase decisions. And so that was what Google needed a lot of help proving out so they could sell billions of dollars in ads.
And when you sold this to Google, you got a 0.5% commission on all future ad sales based on this work, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well done. Great, great, great commercials. So I feel very lucky as a podcast host all the time, but particularly this last month. So it's probably not very often in your life you get to speak to one person who's changed an entire industry. And in the last month, I've spoken to two, because the last episode before this was Magda from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, who was involved in writing How Brands Grow, which is somewhere over there on that shelf. And How Brands Grow has changed how marketers view about science. And ZMOT, there's a line in a book about it which says something like, every so often something comes along and changes the rule book. Now, a lot of people claim to have changed the rule book or invented the 17 Ps or something like that. But this genuinely did change how marketers approached online advertising and sales and everything, didn't it?
It did. I'm really proud of it. I mean, it changed the course of my career. And I think that the thing that it did is it said, look, stop measuring your online sales over here and your retail sales over here and your social. At the time, social wasn't a big deal, but like stop having everything that you're measuring on sort of all of these different continuum. Let's put them on a single line and just ask people what did you use before making your decision to purchase? And then what was most influential and how influential? And ultimately, we've landed in a place where media is so fragmented. Brands have to be able to have some calculation that tells them a straightforward analysis of, okay, the people that bought me, where did they go for information? And of the information that they sought out, was it a review? Was it an expert review? Was it a podcast? Was it a Subway ad? Which of those made the difference for them? And then what was said in that environment that made the difference? And so that's essentially what ZMOT comes down to, is how do you get in early? And then what do you say along the way?
And as this sort of has been evolving over time, and I mean, the industry has been awash with last click attribution for, I mean, do you know, amazingly, there are still many, many companies who just focus on last click attribution, which is simple, I guess. Is it effective? Probably not. But how does, you know, this sort of approach, because it's not new research, is it? I'm just trying to find the date on it. What year was it?
Yeah, I think it was published in 2012, maybe. We
2012.
started it in
Pre,
20.
so
Mhm.
6 years, 8 years BC, before COVID. So you know, that's what defines the world. So you know, there's a lot of simplicity, but also nuance in the research. So actually, we probably should roll back and just, do you want to give a very kind of 60-second explanation of how you did the research and what you
Sure.
found and that sort of approach, just for anyone who's like, oh yeah, I've heard of that, but I don't really know
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah. So there was, a VP named Jim Lisinski. He's gone on to write some great books about AI, and he's terrific. He teaches, I think, at Northwestern in Chicago. And Jim was a VP at Google, and he was trying to convince clients to buy ads on Google. And he was having trouble because, again, people were saying things like, nobody's going to buy laundry detergent online. That's just not happening. And so he came to our media lab, which was in Los Angeles, and we talked to him about the future of media and the way in which we were seeing people research and really inform themselves. And one of the things that or our major hypotheses going into ZMOT was people are doing more research than ever before. And, that is part of the information age that we live in. But we are doing that research in a way as a form of entertainment. And so we started to see that people were doing more and more and more research, like to the point where it was just almost unbelievable. And yet, for things that people care about, they'll spend hours. I mean, I don't know, Andy, like what's a category that you're really passionate about?
Holidays,
Holidays,
vacations.
going on holidays,
Yeah,
vacations.
yeah.
So, okay, I'll just do this with you because this is how the research works. So, what sources of information do you use before booking a holiday?
I'm old fashioned, so TripAdvisor, blogs, friend recommendations, things I see on the TV, maybe bits you see of friends going on holiday to places on Instagram. You know, probably they're the top five, I would say.
Okay, so you just named like half a dozen things and you weren't even trying, right? And
Yeah.
you probably used more. You probably went to Reddit. You might have heard something on a podcast. You probably went to Pinterest or Airbnb, right? So like
Even the
right
travel
there,
agents on the high street, they're still travel agents, and you're like, oh, that looks a great place. Never
right,
go into the travel agents, but it's certainly a.
right. So you use all of those sources of information. That's what we call source usage. And so we'd ask you about that. We'd do a card sort with you, and this is what we did in ZMOT. Did you use it? Did you not? We have about 50 sources we've been tracking for however many years it's been, I guess 12 years now. And we say, did you use it? Did you not? Did you use it? Did you not? Then once we have all the sources that you did use, we'd say, okay, which of those were how influential were each of those? And then we go through it with you again, and you say, well, when I talked to my friend, that was really influential. When I looked on TripAdvisor, that was also really influential. I did use a source from the travel agent, but it wasn't very influential. And so then what we do is we say, okay, so these sources were highly influential, these were moderately influential, and these were not influential. And then we do another step, which is to say, well, what information did you get? Because the way in which a lot of brands for many, many years, decades, did their advertising is they would just be like, this is my brand. here's my website, and maybe one piece of information, a slogan, and they would just put that everywhere, right? And actually, the information that you want from TripAdvisor is different from the information that you want from your friend, or different from the information that you want from all of these other sources. And so we began to give brands, and in this case, Google basically wanted to take the research to all the brands that they were pitching and say, okay, CPG family partners, here is all of the ways in which people are searching for CPG products online. Here's the information they're seeking out, that kind of thing. At the time, user reviews were really important. They've become less important over time because people don't believe that they're all real. So that's impacted them. But at one time, they were like the top number one source. And so we go through that activity, but at scale. So what I just did with you, we would ask 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people. We're doing this right now for our brand. I wish I could say more about it, but they're trying to figure out how do they grow in a competitive space, and how do they tell their story to the industry to get brands to advertise with them.
And methodologically, is that even a word? The methodology
Yes,
you used for
absolutely.
this. Let me use words I'm confident in. So the methodology for this, you do hear when people talk about kind of research methodology, asking people to kind of post-rationalize how they went through a process like that. Some people will go, "Whoa, you can't do that," because people don't even know what's influenced them and how it's done that. So I guess you've been asked this question before. So what's your sort of take on that?
Yeah, such a good question. So what we do is we do a quantitative online survey among people who actually made a purchase. And we're not asking them to rationalize. We're not asking them to even make, so much value judgments. We're just saying, did you use it? Yes or no? Did you use this thing? And the thing about people who actually made a purchase, we call them purchasers versus intenders. The people that actually did it can pretty well tell you what they did. Think about the last vacation that you booked, or, if you bought a car recently, or even, it doesn't even have to be like that big of an item. It could be you bought something you really liked. So for example, I had wanted to get like a backpack for a really long time. And I had something very specific in mind. Like, I didn't want something too sporty, but I didn't want something too frilly. And I spent probably a year. That's the other thing that ZMOT includes, is how long does it take to go from undecided to decided? And what's fascinating is that people can take a really long time depending on how much they value an item or how hard it is to understand the category. And so, but if we ask you, okay, so you bought, so in this case, if you were asking me, okay, so you bought this bag, where'd you go? Well, I went to Etsy, I went to Pinterest, I went to Nordstrom.com, I went to all these different brands. I didn't find anything. In fact, I ordered ones, I sent them back. And then I was in Berlin, and I was in some weird market hall, and there was a cool bag, and there I went. And so when you ask people about something that they recently bought, they can take you through their steps. And so we're not asking them to come up with any sort of rationalization. They just tell us, did you do it or not?
And I can't remember if it was ZMOT or if it was kind of as they iterated on that afterwards, where I've done a good bit in the auto sector in the last 5 years or so. And I remember from pre-COVID seeing some research from Google about the length of time people took when they were in the car market. So just going back to you saying about how long it can be sometimes. And I think the average point someone is in market for a car from when they start the research to their purchase is about 6 weeks. But if you dive further into that research, it's like that's the average. Some people are in that market. I think the kind of the longest they tracked was about 16 months or something.
Yeah, I
I
was going
can't
to say
quite remember
18
that number.
months.
80, yeah,
Yeah.
it was a huge
And
number.
or
And
then you
some
go
people
through
do it in 24 hours. Some people go, I need a car, bum, 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 bang, and buy.
exactly. In fact, my dad did that. He had a midlife crisis, and he came home with a very expensive car that my stepmother promptly made him return.
Was it a convertible sports car,
Yes, it
classic?
was.
Yeah. Look, I mean, men of a certain age, we're all the same.
Yeah, and so actually what's funny too is that the higher income, I mean, and this does make sense, right? You're the shorter time span, you have less to lose, right? So the higher income
Mhm.
somebody is, the purchase of the car, it doesn't impact their overall wealth. Um, but the other thing that can impact it is occasion. Is there a new baby that's being born? Do you have a new job? Right. So that's a big one. And so, yes, on average, and this is why I get a little irritable when people say, "What's the path to purchase?" And it's like, well, it depends. Is there a new baby? Is there a new job?
Sorry, I used to have a klaxon that went off on the podcast. If anyone ever said it depends, the marketing klaxon would go off somewhere.
Oh gosh, I'm going to be in
It just
trouble.
depends. No, it's fine. We'll let you off. We'll let you off. I'm sorry. So yeah, it depends, but it does depend.
It does depend. And so it's easy to make these pronouncements like the path to purchase is this. You start here and then you go here and then you go here. And our research, because what we did is after the work with ZMOT, we had a lot of clients come to us and say, okay, well, we want to understand how frequent this path to purchase is among how many people and in what order. And what we found is that shockingly, like below 5%, below 1% of people ever do things in the same order, in the same way. There's just too much information. There's too many variables. And so, I think it's important for brands to recognize there are some general things that are common among a path to purchase, and they can be highly variable depending on what's at stake for the person who's buying.
Yeah, I mean, what the category entry point is, isn't it? So depending on why you need to jump in to buy that thing, that can change how long you're taking your research for it.
Right.
Which can sometimes make life confusing for a marketer, because we had Rory Sutherland on, who called average is the moron's eye view of the world. But the fact is that when you're running a brand or marketing for a brand, you have to make some bets based on the average person, don't you? And
Yes.
the middle of the bell curve, where you're going to get the most bang for your buck and hit the most people. And that can be quite difficult in some industries and some sectors, can't it?
It can be. And it's why I love the way that we present our quote unquote path to purchase. When you say that, most people think of a linear path that starts here and goes to here over X period of time. I will do that if a client makes me, but I don't like doing it because it's not representative of all of the different possibilities. But you're right. Sorry, my cat is making an appearance.
It's all right. We like pets on this. What's your cat called?
This is Sheba.
Hi, Sheba. Sheba doesn't care. Classic cat behavior is like, who is this? I'm
don't
not
care.
interested.
Don't care. So instead of showing a path to purchase, this linear thing, what I like to do is do a classic 2x2, which I don't know how familiar you or your audience is, but 2x2 is essentially, a graph that has an X and a Y axis, right? Upper right corner is where we say a lot of people are doing this and it's really influential. And as a marketer, you can then look and you can say, all right, well, do I want to invest in the things that are in the upper right corner? Because a lot of people use them and they're really influential. Or as a marketer, I might not be able to afford all the things in that upper right corner. But guess what? There's some up and coming things that not a ton of people use, but for those who do, it's super influential. Podcasts are a great example. And actually now podcasts are widely used, but let's just say like 30 to 40% of people listen to podcasts, but the net influence is, let's say, 80%. Well, then that's a worthwhile investment. And so I love the 2x2 because it allows marketers to get all the nuance and then make choices based on their brand, their dollars, without forcing this sort of nice, pretty little fairy tale.
Yeah. And I was in a debate on LinkedIn just the other day about the funnel and linear models, and somebody declared it dead, and I weighed in and went, I don't think it is dead. And I think, to my mind, and I said in a slightly condescending way, I said the only people who declare the funnel dead are the people who never understood how to use it in the first place. And every client they work with gets exactly the same funnel. I'm like, well, no, it was never like that, but the point is, no one's ever looks like the classic funnel, and maybe that means the model is broken anyway. So maybe I'm accepting it should be dead. But it was never just you lost all the this same percentage of people along the way down to.
I mean, I think people believed. I think people did believe that you could just have that and it would just do that, but that was always a misunderstanding, I think, and it's become more challenging because of fragmentation and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's made it easier to debunk it, even though I would sort of defend it a little, but one of the reasons we've now got more data. When I was first trained as a marketer, you didn't have much data to work with unless you were doing TV campaigns, really. And even then, you were kind of the data you were looking at. We did this thing, did the phone ring, and did we sell more stuff?
Right.
That was it, right? Whereas now it's like, we're awash with this, and we can see what's working and where this is coming from. So it's become easier to debunk it and go, yeah, this just doesn't look like anything for us.
Right.
So yeah, no, you're right, absolutely. Is there a question coming? I probably should ask you a question. So you did the research and you found sort of this new way and this new approach, and then Google sort of bit your arm off and ran with it. Was that, kind of, did you sort of sit back and pop the champagne and sort of sit there overlooking the ocean in LA going, I've done now, that's it, career's made, have the drinks and I'm done? Is that how it went?
No. But we had a lot of fun. I mean, we got to travel all over. Google was very generous. They allowed us to just speak to whoever we wanted to. And actually, I think it's a great model for B2B marketing. I think a lot of B2B marketers don't give away what they learn. And Google did. Now, granted, it's easier when you're the biggest, one in the room, but still, they could have made a choice and said, no. This is ours. We're going to put it in our vault and, we'll tightly control it. And it wouldn't have achieved anywhere near the success that it did. And basically the phone rang for the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It just on the basis of that study. And it completely turned me into a researcher. I mean, so I guess like there wasn't like a single moment of, but over 2 years, I began to realize, oh shit, this just changed my career.
Were you just about to tell me you didn't have a zero moment of truth in your career? Is that what you were about to tell me? It was, wasn't it? Right. Okay. You mentioned something there about going around speaking to different people. I almost want to jump around your career a little bit, but you talk about research on stage a lot, which it sounds like you've been doing since 2012 or maybe even before that. And I'm always really fascinated. These things, if you're watching, you see here, I go to a lot of conferences, and these are all the passes from all the conferences. Well, since I moved house anyway. I talk at a lot of conferences, and I just tell stories, right? That's all I do. And rarely use a percentage, rarely use a stat, because nobody ever remembers them. And I've sat at enough conferences and been bored to sleep by enough researchers presenting slide after slide, chart after chart, percentage after percentage. How do you present research and keep people engaged and interested when you're dealing with huge data sets and life-changing stuff? How do you present that and keep people interested?
Yeah. Well, I am a pretty good speaker. So there's that.
Absolutely.
No, but what I like to do at conferences is I like to bring real current data. That's my preferred thing to do, because nothing drives me crazier than going to a conference and not seeing real data. So I will usually look and see, okay, so for example, I was just asked to speak in San Francisco earlier this year on thought leadership. I don't have data on thought leadership. I have examples of thought leadership, but what I did have is we had just run a study on consumer sentiment in the United States. And so I shared some of that data. I gave people a peek into sort of consumer sentiment and then built my talk around that. So they had something juicy to bite into, and I used that to make my point. So that's what I try to do. If I'm going to go speak, I try to always have current new data, and then I try to, build stories around that.
I heard a guy, Dave Trott, I think he's a kind of legendary British ad guy, and he did a little bit about data in one of his presentations, which was basically like great ads from the last 30 years or something like that. But the way he said it was, every number tells a story. Yeah. And that's how he brings data to life. It's like nobody cares that it's 61% or 12% or 2.2% or whatever it is. It's the story of either how you got to that number or what that number means to you that matters. But when he was doing a short little bit of data in a 30-minute presentation, but when you're doing a whole 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, the temptation must just be, we've got this great chart and this great chart and this great chart. Do you kind of find yourself going, no, I need to stop. I need to pull the story back into this?
Do you know, I struggle with that less because I worked in radio and television. So I kind of know how to build, go from end to end and kind of create a crescendo. But I will tell you, our staff struggles with that. Like when we do a really big project and we have so many data points and, from so many markets, and there's so many different ways you could look at it. it can be very, very hard for the staff to know how to weave it together. And so usually, and of course, in the past, when we worked in the agency side, you would just print out all the pages, you'd put them on the wall, you'd literally tape them on the wall, and then you'd move them around until you could kind of see your story developing. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We don't do that anymore because and we're all working from different places and right. Um, but what I will have them do is I actually will have them pull out like on slides so that you can just see kind of all the slides and literally push your chair back and sort of be like, okay, if I'm here, can I see the story? That's a technique that I use still to this day, even in digital form. And the other one is I usually will chop off the first 20 slides, first 10 to 20 slides. And because I think that oftentimes researchers, presenters, you should enter late, leave early. That's the classic idea in filmmaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with research reports or presenting at a conference. What is the most important thing you're saying in the story? Start there, not 20 slides in after you've done a really boring setup.
Absolutely. So I was lucky. The reason I disappeared off camera, I was actually
Yeah.
looking for my Post-it notes. I'm still old school, so I start with Post-its rather than printing it all out now. I like stick it all around. But the other thing, and it is from filmmaking, there's a great scene in the How They Made Star Wars about the opening shot of the original Star Wars. And but it's hard to think now that Star Wars wasn't always going to be the greatest, the biggest film of its time and the greatest film ever made. They
Right.
were
Right.
nervous. They about 6 months before it opened, they did some pre-screenings and it was panned by everybody.
Mhm.
And one of the things they said is that they knew they had to get that opening shot right. And the guy who was responsible for the special effects says, and it's you can watch it on Disney Plus, and he says, we knew we had to capture them in the first 10 seconds as that spaceship flew over their head. And if we had them in that 10 seconds, we had them for the movie.
Yeah.
And I show that clip to people when they're talking about how do I make my presentation better? And like, when you are introduced on stage, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Devora Rogers. Everybody gives you that first 30 seconds of attention. If you're good, the great distraction device stays in their pocket. If you're terrible, everyone goes back to email, Slack, Teams, whatever it is, and just gets on with the day and waits for you to finish, right? That's it. And too many people walk on stage and go, hi, my name's Devora Rogers. Like, well, the person's just said that when you walked on stage. I work at, they've also just said that before you walked on stage. And I'm here to tell you about, it's on the slide behind you, what they're here to tell you about. So can you just cut all that? And it's like, what can you tell people in that first 30 seconds that's going to make them go, oh. And I call them sit forward moments or oh moments or look up moments. People go, oh. And if you get one of them in your first 30 seconds, you have the room.
I have a great story about that. When I was on the agency side, I was working for a company called Shopper Sciences. Today, we have adapted a lot of the research that we did there for alter agents. And one of the VPs or EVPs, I don't know, some one of the leaders of the agency said, "Hey, Walgreens is doing an event, and it's just going to be like 6 people. We're just be sitting around a conference room, no big deal." And I said, "Do I need to prepare anything?" He was like, "No, don't prepare anything." I get to like a very large hotel. Okay, so that was my first sign, but I was like, they have small conference rooms.
Yeah.
Walk into a very large ballroom with 1,000, 2,000 people, and I have nothing prepared. Yeah. And so I started going on my computer, like, I gotta get the slides. At that time it was PowerPoint. And then at some point, I don't know, higher power, better voice, better angel says, you're not going to be able to put the right story together sitting here in this ballroom. Close the laptop and just go up there and talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, and everybody else had been PowerPoint, like clicking the slide, clicking the slide. Yeah. So when I got up there, I said, I'm not going to use PowerPoint. And literally, you want to talk about lean forward. Everyone leaned forward. They were like, let's see how this plane is going to crash, right?
And it didn't though, did it?
Nope. I gave one of the best presentations I've ever done. People stayed glued the entire time because I knew what I needed to say. Do you know, I didn't need the slides.
You know your subject inside out, don't you? So
Right.
that's you don't know. Yeah, but I always say to people, you're the presentation, not the slides. Don't get those two things backwards, right? You are the presentation.
So true.
I am going to get back to talking about research, but I just want to tell you briefly. I once saw Bob Geldof speak. Boomtown Rats singer, this guy who started Live Aid.
Yeah.
He came to do a conference in Belfast, and he thought he was on a panel, and his plane was delayed flying him from London. So he arrived literally 5 minutes after the panel was supposed to start, and he's walking on the side of the stage. I was at the front because I was like, "This is going to be good," but we'd seen the program. We'd been there all day. Bob Geldof was the closing keynote. Bob Geldof didn't know this. He thought he was just sitting on a panel. So he walked to the side of the stage, and you can see the guy with the earpiece in going, right, okay, so the lectern's out. We haven't got your slides. And he's looking at him going, slides? I haven't got fucking slides. I'm on a panel. And they're like going, no, you're the keynote. So he walked out, still with a coffee in his hand, his coat on and his scarf on. And he's like, right, I thought I was on a panel. Turns out I'm keynoting. Let me just take my scarf and my coat off, and then we'll be fine. So he took his scarf and his coat off, and then did the greatest 40 minutes I have ever sat through. He just told story after story. He talked about when he went to meet Maggie Thatcher and how he demanded money from people on the. And you just sat there going, "This is incredible."
Wow.
No notes, no prep. Boom, off he went. It was amazing. So maybe that's the answer. Just get thrown in at the deep end. That is the answer.
I love too the bit about let me just get my coat off and my scarf off. See, that's the thing I think that people forget when they present. And I had a coach tell me this. He described Sammy Davis Jr. And he said, you know, Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the, you know, most amazing performers of his time. He could, you know, speak to and move an audience in powerful ways. But one of the things that he did is he never did it perfect. He dropped the mic. He would forget a line.
Mm-hmm.
And I have used that. And that's the moment, right? Let me take off my scarf. Let me put down my coat. And it's very humanizing and vulnerable, and it definitely makes people lean in.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we might have to get you back for a session on presenting. We could talk about presenting the whole time as well in conferences. But let's go back to your day job, the thing that pays the bills. So, as a market researcher, I mean, let me phrase this question differently. As a marketer, nothing winds me up more than terrible market research, and it seems that nobody is worse at doing market research than marketers. So when someone comes to you, do they come to you with a problem, or do they come to you and say, I need you to prove this point? So are you looking going, okay, this sounds like it's going to be great because this client gets it? And if so, what are those signs? And this is a red flag because that client clearly doesn't get it. So what are the green flags? What are the red flags when people come to you?
Gosh, this is my favorite part of my job, right? Because my job is to figure out what problem are we trying to solve and what's the right tool or approach for the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's literally why I get up every morning. You know, even when life is hard, even when there's crazy stuff happening in the world, you know, I have somebody that's going to write to me and ask me, hey, we're trying to figure out how to do this thing globally and we're not sure if it's going to work, or we don't, I had one recently, we don't know why we're growing. We don't know why we're being successful. Can you help us solve that?
Okay. An
Yeah,
open question. Yeah.
right. Or like, you know, we're number two and we're trying to keep up with our main competitor. You know, what do we do? So all kinds of different problems get brought to us. And a green flag is when they tell us these are our objectives.
Mm-hmm.
This is the problem we're trying to solve. That's amazing, because that's how we build really good research is, and it's the same with like a marketing brief too. What are we trying to do? You know, and sometimes you know, a red flag can be people are like, I want to know this, 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 I want to, and you're like, yeah, but what problem are you trying to solve? Like, are you trying to sell more? Are you trying to get into a new retailer? Like, what are you doing? So a green flag is and I don't need like an RFP. I'll actually, something I do with clients now is if they don't have an RFP, we'll just record the call. I'll transcribe it and turn it into an RFP for them. And if they want to work with us, fine. And if they don't, also
Yeah.
fine. Um,
Has that become easier since Copilot became a thing? Do you...
I don't use Copilot, and I'm very choosy about like which AI and how, for a number of different reasons. But I really like Google Meets transcribing, and I can just basically turn that into a very quick brief. I just ask them certain questions. What problem are you trying to solve? That kind of thing. So those are green flags, knowing your objectives. Red flags, I would say, are when internally clients can't decide what they need. So it's very common.
I feel like you're speaking to my soul here.
Yeah, where clients...
Were you listening to the call I was on earlier today? Is that what was happening?
It's really common that a CMO will call us and they'll say, like, this brand has never done a segmentation. And I don't know who I'm speaking to. I don't know I don't know who my priorities are. But then there's somebody else there, a CEO or whatever, that's like, yeah, we don't need a segmentation. We need a brand tracker, or we need, some sort of jobs to be done, or, and so when an organization can't decide on what they need and they can't trust their CMO, that's usually a red flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I could see, because you can start to, it's almost like trying to nail a cloud to a wall at that stage, isn't it? Because every time you think you're getting close, something moves and it just all goes awry. I can understand.
We worked with a wonderful CPG brand, and I really love what they do, and I love their origin story. But unfortunately, that's what happened. And, it was frustrating for us. I'm really proud of the work that we did for them, but they kept moving the ball. One minute they wanted to have a story to tell retailers. One minute they wanted to have a segmentation. The next minute they needed a brand tracker, and so that can be very challenging.
One thing that you notice when you've been in marketing a long time, or I would say I notice, is that I always thought as a younger man that there would be a correlation between how well put together an organization is and how successful they are. But I'm constantly amazed by how many utterly chaotic organizations are doing ridiculously well.
Yeah.
And, like you're talking about this and I'm going, yeah, of course, what an idiot. CMO's terrible, or the CEO doesn't let the CEO. This is just awful organization. But you're probably talking about a brand that did 3 billion last year and 3.2 billion. And you're like, how are you doing that? Is there a correlation between being well organized and being successful, or is there still a little bit of luck and pixie dust that we just don't know about yet?
I mean, in film and in art, you talk about luck and timing and lighting. Good lighting, good luck, good timing, right? And I think that there are a lot of brands who they came about in a time where there wasn't a lot of competition, and they were able to grow. They hit it right at the right moment. Mm-hmm. But then what happens is all these other brands start coming along, and it has become in some ways easier to turn into a brand, right? To develop that. Yeah. And then they don't know how to compete, and they haven't practiced doing the work, doing the research, knowing who they are above all, and how to translate that into a message people will buy. I think that there are brands that have gotten lucky and think we'll never need research. And it's like, no, you got lucky. That won't last forever.
And how often does somebody quote either Henry Ford or Steve Jobs at you as a reason for why they don't need research? And how many people have you killed and buried in your back garden because of that, and because of how utterly wrong they are as well?
I think most of those folks don't come to me. One, because they're not doing research. Two, I don't suffer fool. I think I've done a really good job. Our CEO has what we call a velvet rope strategy, which I highly recommend to anyone in the B2B and small business world, which is we do really good work and such that, and we don't, I think we charge a fair amount, like it's not excessive, and so we get to choose our clients. Mm-hmm. And that makes our work a lot easier, because research is a service-based business. And so if you have clients who are not great or don't believe in what you do, it's miserable.
Yeah, that's true. No.
I count myself lucky that
that you don't have to deal with the idiots.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the problems then, in I feel like all I'm doing is talking to you about problems, but I think market research is a challenge in the marketing industry. And my belief is that that's because most marketers don't know enough about market research. True. Partly, I don't think it's taught properly in universities and schools and colleges. And I also think partly you're to blame. Not that you're particularly. But because marketers don't understand market research, they never really try and do it. They just outsource it and it comes back and they read the report. But I actually think that understanding the nuts and bolts of how and why and the methodology behind it actually transforms how you view research. It was transformational for me, so maybe I'm just projecting that. But do you think there's something that we can do to make marketers better at market research, at least have a better understanding of it?
It's a really good question. When I'm working with clients and I can tell that they don't have a fully developed understanding of market research, I do try to kind of bring them along with me and teach them. So I have a
Pull the
client.
curtain back for them.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have a client who they work in the gambling industry. They're a really fascinating client, and they know that they need to do research, but they don't understand it. And so they came and they were like, "We want to do focus groups." That's very common, by the way. And that is a red flag usually. I'm like, what do you mean focus groups? And it turns out they're just like, that's the shorthand for people that don't know about research to say research, focus groups. Well, that's qualitative research. And under qualitative research, there are in-depth interviews. There is ethnographies. There's mobile ethnographies. There are focus groups. There are triads and dyads, and you could go on and on, right? So there's a lot of different techniques that we use in market research depending on the environment and our objectives and all that kind of stuff. And so I had to really educate them. This is qualitative. This is quantitative. This is what you're going to learn in this. This is what you're going to learn in this. And so I do try to bring clients along. And I do think that researchers and academic organizations would be well served to spend more time educating. But I think that I don't know. It's a hard question. At the end of the day, people have to want to learn, and they have to recognize that market research is a domain. I think a challenge is that oftentimes market researchers are a little bit like engineers, so they don't translate their world, not intentionally, but they just live in a world of numbers and all that. I think that's why I've done well, is because I kind of act as that bridge.
You can do
And
the
I
black
have
and white
language.
and the color. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But I think that marketers would be well served to learn more about research and how it can impact their business, because as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the most powerful tools that you have. Otherwise, you're just guessing. And now with AI, like, I don't know, the AI machine can come up with anything, but what is it based on? What do consumers want? And I guess maybe that's my point, is above all else, in order to do good market research, you have to put on the hat of the consumer or the person that is going to ultimately be the end buyer, and just solve for their needs. Everything else, exactly the technique you use, all that can influence quality, but what needs do they have? If we can understand that, then usually you can do pretty good market research.
My advice to a lot of marketers is very simple when it comes to market research: is start small. And the advice I give is talk to your customers. Really, really simple, right? I was speaking at a conference in Athens in Greece, and I said it was an e-commerce conference. So yeah, granted, these people are sort of sat behind a screen all day. I said, how many of you have spoken to a customer in the last 6 months? I said, it could be dealing with a complaint. It could be in store if you've got store as well as retail or whatever. How many of you have spoken to a customer, a conversation in the last 6 months? It was 3% of the audience.
Yeah.
Right? And I find that terrifying. So then I started asking at other conferences. I've asked it in the US, I've asked it in London, I've asked it in different parts of Europe. It's always it's never more than 5%, let's put it that way, 2 to 5%. And I'm terrified for marketers. It's like, how do you even know what problem you're solving for your customer, what part you play in their life? And this isn't replacing market research. This is just getting to know your audience to be better at your job. 97% of marketers haven't spoken to a customer in the last 6 months. Now, you're probably saying that's not real research, Andy, but it's a straw poll research.
No,
I'm happy
agree,
to stand by.
I agree with you. I agree with you that starting small is a great way to go. Just start having conversations, and they can be simple questions. In fact, usually the simple questions are the best, right? Hey, how'd you learn about us? Oh, what problem are we solving for you? Is there something that we could do that we're not doing? That kind of thing.
And as someone who talks far too much, as I'm sure you've noticed in the last hour, I find it really difficult to shut up. But my advice to people is like, ask a question and shut up, because people don't like silence. So if you can keep that silence for 3 to 5 seconds, people will fill it with everything you need to know, won't they? Like, oh, yeah, oh, so actually I was going to go to this shop and then I did this and then they did, and it was cheaper here, so I went there, but then you didn't say this and this person said, and you're like, okay, that's everything. But you've just got to shut up, haven't you? Ask a good question, stay quiet for more than 5 seconds.
That's right.
Simple. So there's market research solved. Job done. Do I send you my invoice now? No.